Good evening, and welcome back to Nothing But the Truth. I'm Trudy Stern. Tonight's show is more than just about a local election. It's about the kind of city and country that we want to live in. Zoran Mamdani, now running in the Democratic primary for mayor of New York City, is a vocal supporter of the BDS movement. Mamdani refused to affirm Israel as a Jewish state, and following October 7th, accused Israel of committing genocide and referred to its military action as war crimes. He stated that if elected, he would direct the New York Police Department to arrest Bibi Netanyahu if he visits New York, basing this on the ICC warrant, even though the United States is not a member of the ICC. He falsely put forth anti-Semitic tropes, claiming from the New York State Senate floor, Assembly floor, that that taxpayer dollars paid for political operatives to go to Israel. Totally false. This isn't just dangerous for Jews. It's dangerous for all New Yorkers because history has shown us time and again that when anti-Semitism is tolerated in public life, it is never the end. It is always just the beginning. It marks the unraveling of truth, civility, and the very democratic values that keep our society free. And that's why I'm so honored to be joined tonight by someone who understands exactly what's at stake, Congressman Ritchie Torres. My dear friend, Congressman Ritchie Torres, has been one of the most courageous and consistent voices defending Israel, confronting anti-Semitism, and standing up for the principles that define a free society. At a time when too many stay silent, he speaks out clearly, fearlessly, and with moral conviction. He recently endorsed Andrew Cuomo in this race, and we'll talk about why that decision matters, what's at stake in this election, and what it means for the Jewish community and for every New Yorker who values democracy and decency. Let's get right into it. My dear friend, Congressman Ritchie Torres, welcome back to Nothing But the Truth.
It's an honor to be here.
So, Ritchie, you've been one of the most outspoken voices warning the dangers of rising anti-Semitism in American politics. In your view, what does the candidacy like someone like Zoran Mamdani signal, not just for the Jewish community, but for the future of democratic values in New York City?
So even though the New York City mayor's race is local in nature, make no mistake, the outcome could have national and even international implications for the fight against anti-Semitism. I cannot imagine a greater setback for the Jewish community, a greater setback for the pro-Israel community than to have a virulent anti-Zionist as the mayor of the most Jewish city in America, in the world. That would be a monumental shift in our politics. It would revolutionize our politics to the detriment of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And so everyone who cares deeply about fighting anti-Semitism, about strengthening and sustaining the U.S.-Israel relationship, has a vested interest in doing whatever needs to be done to defeat Zoran Mamdani.
So we know from history that anti-Semitism is often the canary in the coal mine. It's the first crack in the foundation of liberal democracy. What warning signs do you see today? What can ordinary citizens, the dangerous normalization, and do you feel in your capacity, do you see that there are many mainstream politicians that view it the same way that you do?
I feel like what makes me unusual is not that I'm expressing views far removed from the mainstream. What makes me unusual is that I'm saying what many people are thinking, but are often too afraid to say. But for me, fighting anti-Semitism is not only about the Jewish state and the Jewish people, it's about the future of our country and civilization. Like if we as a society cannot bring ourselves to condemn with moral clarity acts of anti-Semitic terrorism, like the cold-blooded execution of Sarah Yaron or the firebombing of Jews in Colorado, if we cannot condemn these acts of terrorism with moral clarity, then we're in danger of rotting from within as a society. And any society that allows itself to be captured by anti-Semitism will not long endure. And America is no exception to that rule.
So you came from the state government. That's where you were when you ran for your first congressional seat.
New York City government, yeah.
New York City government. So have you noted a difference in the type of leadership is there now rather than what was there when you were in that role?
Yeah, so I've been either a candidate or an elected official since 2013. And over the course of more than a decade, I've seen firsthand the radicalization of progressive politics against both the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And one of the most troubling trends in New York City politics has been the rise of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, and Zoran Mamdani is a DSA candidate. And back in August of 2020, the DSA sent out a questionnaire to city council candidates. And the questionnaire had a foreign policy section that only had 2 questions. Question number 1, do you pledge never to travel to Israel if elected to the city council? And question number 2, do you pledge to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel? And so in the democratic socialist worldview, it is permissible to travel to China, which has committed genocide against Uyghur Muslims, or to travel to Russia, which invaded a sovereign nation state like Ukraine, or to travel to Iran, which is the leading state sponsor of terror in the world. But travel to the world's only Jewish state, that is strictly forbidden. And if that is not evidence of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, then I'm not sure what would be. So I consider the DSA to be a fundamentally anti-Semitic force in New York City politics.
Have you seen a rise in people supporting the DSA and also a normalization of their perspective amongst mainstream or many elected officials?
The DSA has become more powerful over time. And look, the fact that the second leading candidate for mayor is a DSA candidate, tells you everything you need to know about the strength of the organization. I mean, he's a credible candidate because the DSA has shown itself to be a powerful force in New York City politics. And more needs to be done to defeat the DSA.
So incredibly frightening as you lay that out. You recently endorsed Andrew Cuomo for mayor, a move that made headlines. Could you walk us through that decision? What it says about the kind of leadership that you believe New York needs right now?
Yeah, so I endorsed the governor for a few reasons. First, unlike most Democrats, he has no fear of the far left. Like, he's willing to stand up to the fear of the far left. He's willing to take a sledgehammer to organizations like the DSA. And I feel like we live in a time when what we need is not a Mr. Nice Guy. We need a Mr. Tough Guy. And Andrew Cuomo, for all his imperfections, is a Mr. Tough Guy, which is the kind of leadership we need. And he is the best hope for defeating Zoran Mamdani. Like, he is the best position to defeat the DSA in the New York City's mayor's race. And then one more thing I admire about the governor is that, at his best, he is a competent manager. The competence of Andrew Cuomo is not a matter of faith, it's a matter of fact, right? The redevelopment of Moynihan Train Hall or LaGuardia Airport or Mario Cuomo Bridge, these are facts. And Andrew Cuomo has demonstrated his ability to be a great builder of infrastructure and to make government work for New York.
Well, I think it's really great how you laid out, your reasons for the endorsement as being so unbelievably important. Many people point to his issues,
Yeah.
his sexual, like having to leave for the, sexual problems that he had, the accusations against him, and also his treatment or handling of COVID. And so, what do you say to people who point to those 2 issues as a reason why they can't get behind him and feel like maybe they would go with Mamdani?
Look, it's not my place to lecture people on how they should vote, but if you believe, as I do, that the highest priority should be to defeat the DSA and defeat Zoran Mamdani, then there's no alternative to Andrew Cuomo. He is not only the best hope, he is the only hope for defeating Zoran Mamdani. And so if you're intent on preventing a DSA takeover of New York City politics, Andrew Cuomo is the only option. He is the only path forward. I'm aware of no viable alternative to Cuomo as a counterweight to the DSA.
Tell our listeners, what would it look like with a DSA takeover of New York City?
Well, Mamdani has said as much. I mean, he said that he would direct the NYPD to arrest members of the Israeli government. And if there are concerns about anti-Semitism on college campuses, those concerns will fall on the deaf ears of New York City government under the leadership of Zoran Mamdani.
Shocking, totally shocking. I want to move over to a little bit of a different topic. So some of your critics have tried to diminish your outspoken support for Israel and the Jewish community by claiming that it's politically motivated, that you only care about this issue because of the backing that you receive. But anyone who follows your work knows that you are a tireless advocate for your district and for the vulnerable communities across the board. How do you respond to that criticism, and what drives your passion for both your constituents and this cause?
Look, if pro-Israel advocacy were so politically expedient, then every member of Congress would be as visibly and vocally pro-Israel as I am. Like, most elected officials tend to do what's in their best interest. And so why am I one of, if it is so politically expedient, why am I one of the few who's able and willing to speak out?
What a great point.
There's no topic on which I face more hate, harassment, and death threats than on the issue of Israel. I've been ambushed outside my home. I've had my office vandalized. My mother's been the target of harassment. There were activists who said, "You're a genocide mother and you should have aborted your son." You know, I have been harassed on the streets. People have seen the videos. I've had racial epithets hurled at me. The Capitol Police are actively investigating threats against my life. You know, there is a price to be paid for standing with Israel. Now, I believe in what I'm fighting for, and I'm going to stand firm. But the notion that it's politically expedient is simply refuted by my own lived experience of all the harassment and hate that I have to face. I mean, I've lost friends, I've lost family relationships. It is the hardest issue in American politics. I'm aware of no issue that is more politically and emotionally charged than the subject of Israel, especially in a time of war. And so I just simply reject the notion that that it's politically expedient. Quite the opposite. I actually feel like it requires courage to speak out against the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism of the far left, especially as a Democrat. You know, if you're a Republican, it's politically safe to be pro-Israel. And if you're a moderate Democrat in a moderate district, it's still politically safe to be pro-Israel. But if you're a liberal Democrat like myself in New York City, which is ground zero for democratic socialism, and your neighbors are members of the squad, it is far more politically dangerous for me to be pro-Israel. But my message is that if I can be unabashedly pro-Israel, then no one else has an excuse. And so I hope that I can set an example of moral clarity and moral courage and moral common sense that will inspire other elected officials to stand up and speak out in defense of their Jewish brothers and sisters.
Well, thank you very much for that. I've actually been with you on the street when we were harassed by people coming down the street and yelling at you and, you know, really saying horrible things to you. So it is really remarkable that you, you know, are able to stand up against that and, you know, and stand up for what you believe in. So thank you so very much. For your leadership and for your steadfast support. But I'm thanking you not just as a pro-Israel person. I want to thank you as an American. What you're standing up for are the values that we all know and love in this country. And how is it that others just don't see that? How is it that others are fine watching it erode?
Look, you and I see America and Israel as forces for good in the world, right? Neither country is perfect, but both are fundamentally good, right? Both are fundamentally democratic, free societies. Whereas there's growing numbers of Americans who see America and Israel not as forces for good, but as forces for evil, right? There are those on the far left and increasingly in the far right who believe that Israel is the root of all evil. I've seen activists blame Israel for over-policing here in the United States. You know, I've seen conspiracy theorists blame Israel for like the weather. You know, I think of anti-Semitism not only as a form of hatred, but almost as a form of brain degeneration. You know, a friend of mine once said that anti-Semitism is a sign that society is no longer thinking straight, because at the core of anti-Semitism is conspiratorial thinking. And I think any society that embraces anti-Semitism will morally and intellectually rot from within. And that is the fear that I have for my own country.
So you're such an amazing speaker. I've heard you speak now many times with, I think, your speech at the Central Synagogue on MLK Day was one of my favorites, and so incredibly articulate and powerful. So what drives you to public service? Because clearly there's so much you could have done, but you chose to do this and at great threats to yourself. So what motivates you?
I feel like I share the ancient Greek understanding of happiness. You know, for the ancient Greeks, happiness is not an emotion, it's not a feeling, but it's the sum total of a life well lived. You know, the first historian who was from ancient Greece was Herodotus, and he would speak of dying. He would speak not of living happy, but dying happy, because he thought of happiness as the fullness of a life well lived. And I feel like the quality of our life is measured by the impact that we have on others. It's measured by the good that we do for others. You know, the question I often ask myself is, what is going to be said about me in my eulogy? What's going to be written about me in my obituary? What am I going to be remembered for? And I want to be remembered for doing an enormous amount of good for an enormous number of people. I want it to be said that the world is a better place because I played a small part in making it a better place. So I take to heart the notion that we're all judged by the impact that we have on those around us, and we should strive to bring out the best in the people around us.
So I can honestly say that you are achieving that, have achieved that. So your eulogy, as they say in our culture, should be in 120 years from now, but it will be.
I'm not sure about that. I hope not.
Definitely will be said that you impacted the world in such an incredibly positive way. And so happy that I'm so personally happy that you follow that, and that is what motivates you, because that is such a pure reason. Most people have ulterior motives for why they do certain things, but yours is so pure for the good of all, and your perspective is so fantastic. Can you share some of the key initiatives that you've led in your district, whether housing, healthcare, economic development? I mean, you are much more than just a pro-Israel advocate. You do so much for everyone. So let's hear about what you've done for the people that you represent in the Bronx.
Yeah, so I feel like what makes me distinctive as an elected official is that I govern from a place of lived experience. Like, I'm not your typical member of Congress. I do not have a net worth of over $1 million. I do not come from a political dynasty. I do not even have a college degree. But what I lack in traditional qualifications, I make up for in lived experience. I know what it's like to face poverty and inequality. And one of the experiences that has had the greatest impact on me is my personal experience with depression. You might know that probably more than a decade before entering Congress, I had dropped out of college because I found myself struggling with depression and abusing substances. And there were moments when I thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the world around me had collapsed. And were it not for mental health care, I never would have had a fighting chance to rebuild my life and put myself on a trajectory that ultimately led to the New York City Council and then to the United States Congress. And so as a member of Congress, I've been a champion of mental health care. And I know from my own experience, when I went to high school in the Bronx, there were no psychologists, no social workers, no psychiatrists. And so when I was experiencing depression, but I had no vocabulary for what I was feeling, I had no mental health professional whose support I could seek. And I often ask myself, if I had had the ability to access mental health care in high school, then maybe all the crises that followed would have been prevented. And so as a member of Congress, I secured about $8 billion to support the largest network of school-based mental health centers in the United States, run by Montefiore, which is the largest provider and the largest employer in the Bronx.
Incredible, totally incredible. It's so remarkable that you took all of the things that were holding you back, or all of the difficulties in your life, and channeled them for such a great cause, for so much good for everyone. It is remarkable, and for that we really have so much to be thankful for. Back to these incidences of hate that we've seen across New York since October 7th, at the college campuses and on the streets of New York. They feel like they're coordinated. They feel like a cultural assault on our society, and that it is coordinated. We see the institutions, the indoctrination taking place on campuses like NYU and Columbia, right here in New York, both of them, which have become hotbeds of anti-Semitism and anti-American ideology. And now we have this mayoral candidate, Zoran Mamdani, who would stand in lockstep with those same forces. So we've come to a very bad place. How do we confront this rising tide, not just by, the policies, but what can we do to push back against this growing organized attack that attacks not just the Jewish people, but our society that Americans hold valuable?
Okay,
Before you answer, actually, the question I have starts with, can it be stopped? A tide is very difficult to stop. So can it be stopped? And then how do you stop it?
Well, I'm an optimist, not by preference, but by necessity. Like, if I felt that we were too powerless to stop the wave of anti-Semitism, then there would be no point in fighting against it. There would be no point in holding public office. So I believe in my ability and your ability and our collective ability to defeat the plague of anti-Semitism here in New York City and elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world. So I feel like we have no choice but to be optimistic. We have to be engaged because the stakes are higher than ever in a post-October 7th world. I mean, we've seen volcanic eruptions of anti-Semitism on college campuses, on social media platforms that are too glaring to ignore. The problem is multifaceted. It has multiple causes, but one of the causes is the corrosive influence of foreign gifts. We know that state sponsors of terror like Qatar have been corrupting American institutions with anti-Semitism. And I feel like we have to fundamentally re-examine our relationship with Qatar. And we have to make every effort to curb Qatari influence within the United States, particularly in higher education, in K-12 education. As far as I'm concerned, there should be a complete ban on foreign gifts from state sponsors of terror like Qatar. We should no longer allow a state sponsor of terror to weaponize American institutions against America and to propagate anti-Semitism in the ranks of higher education. It's that phenomenon can no longer be allowed to stand.
Okay, so as an optimist, you do feel that we can stem the rising tides of this, not just anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, but like anti-American hate. They're pulling down the American flag and placing up the Hamas flag in its place and throwing down all of our monuments. So you are optimistic that this can be reversed.
The lesson of history is that anti-Semitism is no match for the Maccabean might of the Jewish people. So I am an optimist because I'm a student of history.
Okay, I love it. I'm also a student of history, and I don't share your optimism as much, but now after hearing you, I do. I urge all of my listeners to go back to YouTube or Google your speech that you gave at the Central Synagogue on MLK Day. It really was very hopeful and optimistic and really heartfelt, and it was remarkable.
In the speech, I said that Hope HaTikva is the anthem of the Jewish people. And I meant it not only literally, but metaphorically. And so I'm hopeful.
Well, I'm loving that. Your kind of leadership, which is rooted in conviction, clarity, and courage, is what our country so desperately needs. And it needs it immediately and right now. Congressman Torres, Ritchie, you are a beacon of the democratic values that define the best of America at a time when those values are under attack from extremists, from anti-Semitism, from those seeking to tear apart the fabric of our nation. And we are so lucky and thankful to have voices like yours standing strong. And I feel very honored to call you a friend and to have had you on my show again. But before we close, any decision on whether or not you're going to run for governor?
So I'm going to make a final decision after the mayor's race. I mean, I see a Cuomo victory as a necessary condition for running for governor. And once the outcome of the mayor's race is known, I'll conduct polling and assess whether there's a path. And if there's a path, I will certainly run. If I conclude that it's too complicated, then I will remain in the House. But no matter what position I hold, you can count on me to be a strong defender of the U.S.-Israel relationship, because it's a value that lies at the core of who I am, not only politically, but personally.
Amazing. Well, can't wait to hear it. And maybe you'll even declare it on our show first. So when you do make the decision, please reach out. To our listeners, thank you for joining us. This has been Nothing But the Truth with Trudy Stern. You can catch us every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on the radio. And if you missed any part of this show or want to listen to any of our past episodes, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.